Welcome back for another installment of Fellowship of the Rink, episode 22. Back with me, per usual. I know we had a little hiatus there for paternity leave. We've got Joe Smith of The Athletic bringing you all the insider info on your Minnesota Wild and Gophers hockey. Joe, how's it feel? Do you have the dad strength yet?
Well, I need to because my son has son strength. Like it's amazing for a month-old, like how strong his arms and legs are, And
Yep.
when you have no hands available to you because you're holding the baby and they start swinging, then you're like Rocky and Rocky 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can just take some swings. But I definitely have the quick ability to change diapers, making up new songs. All the things like how to get a bottle warm quicker and all that stuff. So you learn the tricks of the trade as you go along. But yeah, I don't know about you, but I was just amazed. Connor got his arms and legs just so strong so quickly. So maybe that'll be good for the right shot D he'll turn out to be.
There we go. Yeah. If I didn't look like such a baby, I would shave off all my facial hair because he grips on and he rips.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one of his favorite things to do. He's sitting next to me right now because he refuses to take a nap. And if he's up within reach, he wants to grab it and just go. That's the only big negative besides obviously what you've experienced with a little bit of change in sleep patterns. But otherwise, there's a lot of things that were different than expected, but mostly good things.
The things that are the quote negatives are just normal things, right? Like Kids are going to cry. They can't talk to you. They can't send you an email or a text message that, hey, this is what's going on. I've got gas or I got a bad diaper. Like you just have to, adjust with the times and figure out what they need and try to give that to them. So, and it's only a stage, right? It's only one part of their growth cycle. And so I was always told the advice to soak in those moments, the rocking them at midnight or 1 a.m. because it don't happen forever. The lap naps are awesome. I love those, so enjoy those while you can, because eventually, like our kid's pretty big. They'll grow out of that pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the funny thing too. I know one of the questions in the mailbag is like biggest surprise so far. This is kind of a cheeky one, but like also serious. I didn't realize how heavy 15 to 20 pounds was. I know you're not quite there yet, but being at the little past the 6-month mark, kid's heavy. And it makes me feel kind of weak. And I'm waiting for the dad strength to just naturally develop. And it hasn't quite happened yet.
And I'll tell you, because I've, done CrossFit pretty regularly the last few years in Minnesota and took a break when the baby came. But my arms have been getting good workouts with the car seat plus kid combo. Just because any car seat you could possibly find, like I feel like none of them are like lightweight. They always have, they're built extra safe, but like I feel like picking up a 10-pound plus baby plus the car seat, you can alternate hands like a farmer's carry a little bit, get into the car. But yeah, that's the weight is part of it, and just kind of trying to figure out the right sweet spot for sleep and getting them up and down, which I think is for every parent, goes through that. But because you have classes all you want and read all the books you want to, but every single kid is different. Like I'm in the dad's group and all 6 or 7 of us, they all reacted differently at different times, right? None of them were all, oh, we're taking roll, we're here ready to go. And then, one handles a diaper the other one way, one needs to be fed at a certain time. So that's the beauty of seeing your kid every day change. Like it's pretty crazy. It's like if you blink, you might miss it. So that's why I'm so grateful to have some time away and time at home, and especially with the off season already being going, is more of a natural fit for that, because it'd be hard. Like the players, when their wives have their kids and they miss it for a day or two, then they're back on the road and they're playing. And like you want a road trip for 10 days, the kid changes so much from week 2 to week 4. So,
he's driving.
Yeah. Driving. Yeah. So yeah, I'm enjoying this time of having, both of us together, and kind of like you outnumber them now 2-on-1. So you have no choice but to be able to handle it.
Yeah, that is fair. And I'm sure COVID plays into it a little bit, but like my whole sense of time with him is crazy. Like it could feel like a blink of an eye and he's like gone from like newborn baby to where he is now. And there's other days where it's like, it feels like time stops. I can't really make any sense of it. No rhyme or reason, but it's crazy. I think that's the easiest way to put it.
Well, I think it's a little bit like quarantine early on, right? Because you're not like leaving the house very much. You know, you're putting on Netflix when you can. You're trying to sleep when you can. Like, you know, there's one day like in the hospital, of course, like we closed all the shades. We didn't know what weather it was or what was going on outside. That's when the days are slower, when you don't have any outings or don't do anything. You know, you kind of do your schedule based upon the naps and the feeding, which is every couple hours or so early on. So yeah, I think it did feel a little bit like the most time my wife and I spent together, you know, a lot was in those early weeks because you're not supposed to really go anywhere. And we did walks by the riverfront and took our dog and get the stroller and stuff. But when you don't leave the apartment, it becomes a little more that Groundhog Day mentality where it's, you know, you do kind of don't even look at your watch or your phone for what time it is.
Yeah, it's nuts. And like we have complete opposites here too. Like your kid was born right in the peak of summer, mine right around Christmas, New Year's, and it didn't feel as weird just because like what am I going to go out and do in the peak of winter? But now I'm getting to relive it. This past week, having my son, my wife, and I all come down with COVID. So now I get to see exactly what you're experiencing, and it is a little stir crazy and it drags the days on, but you know, it's temporary.
Yeah, it's temporary. And like you start to see the little smiles start. I don't know when it started for Logan, but starting to see a little bit of the smiles, which is very welcome because you only have a couple of different facial expressions, or usually not happy ones. So it's nice to get the smiles here and there, like a little bit of a laughs, or, you know, we're reading a book or singing them something and they have that reaction. It's like, oh, just snapshot that in time. And they'll be smiling a lot more eventually when they're older. But in the beginning, when you know, every dad or mom knows the wind up when a kid's ready to wind up and ready to cry, you know, like you see like the deep breath and like the look on their face, like, you know, it's like, okay, this is coming, and there's going to be no pacifier or no thing I can say that's just going to change what this is. But but that's so nice to have the little smiles peek in here and there.
Oh, it makes all the difference early on. And I think I told you, for us, like the smiles definitely peaked in, but like really when you hit that 3-month mark, which of course is ironically when like mom is supposed to go back to work and stuff, but that's when the personality really shined through, like started to like interact with us more, not just like smiling at us, but like being more aware that you're there. It's and then the next 3 months that have come from that, I'm worried this kid's going to start crawling and moving around soon. It's wild. But let's get into the episode here. Meaty mailbag for everyone. Thank you to all the listeners who have chimed in and given us discussion topics here. 2 that we wanted to just hit on real quick that weren't in the mailbag, but I know are relevant just from timeliness. And I know, Joe, your coverage of both these players. Let's start with just the Steven Stamkos situation, and that I'll kind of leave it to you to paint the canvas how you want, because I know it's a pretty full bag when it comes to an icon like him leaving Tampa.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we've talked about this on previous episodes, how I felt kind of all along that no matter how it looked or how it sounded, that they would smoother, you know, calmer heads would prevail and they'd find a way to get it done. It's hard to imagine Steven Stamkos playing anywhere else but with the Tampa Bay Lightning, having covered him since pretty much the beginning. But you also kind of read some tea leaves as he went along, you know, starting with last summer of them not engaging in contract talks and kind of slow playing everything, and Stamkos being, you know, out there, outspoken, disappointed about it. And then the longer it got, you're like, why isn't this getting done? And then towards the end, when you saw the comments of him going to free agency, and then so I'm not surprised that he ended up like in Nashville. I think Nashville's a great fit, both for his family and as a team, what their needs are. And like obviously he can play in another no state income tax state, play with some good friends like Luke Shen, you know, a good place for family, live outside of Nashville there. A team that really added a lot in the summertime and free agency in March or so. Like they're going to be a tough team for the Wild to deal with next season. But it just, you know, everybody, I think you grew up as a fan, like I grew up in Detroit, and Yzerman played his entire career with the Red Wings, right? And like it was hard for any of us to imagine him playing the Sabres or somewhere, you know, right? But but that's very few and far between where you can find, like, when was the last, like, mini Minnesota Wild player that started to finish his career in the same uniform? And are there, maybe another question later in this podcast is there a Wild player now who will start and finish his career in Minnesota of any of the current players, whether it's Faber, whether it's Spurgeon, whether it's Brodin? Are there any in that group that will be part of this? But for Steven Stamkos' situation, clearly there were, from Steven Stamkos' comments afterwards, that he didn't maybe feel as wanted as he wanted to come back. And by the offer that was reported or believed to be the 8 years and $3 million annual average, not going to get it done. I mean, I know they say he made enough money in his life, but like so is everybody. Like somebody, like I wouldn't.
Hedman got a contract the next day
for the same amount of money that Stamkos got in Nashville. So it's not that there's animosity, but you could definitely, as a player, your pride, you want to feel like you're wanted and feel like you're important to the organization. And it never felt like Stamkos was a huge priority, right? They're like, oh, we'd love to have him back, and he's so important to us, but it's only at these terms, right? And then once they went out and traded Sergachev and created $15 million in space, and then didn't up their offer, like, take it or leave it, we're going to sign Gensel for $9 million next day, you kind of knew, it almost felt like he was pushed out in a way. So October 28th will be circled on the calendar when Steven Stamkos comes back to Tampa Bay for what will be the tribute video of all tribute videos. But for anybody who hasn't read it yet, he did a big story or big letter to Tampa on the Players Tribune. Steven Stamkos did, so kind of encapsulated his whole time there from expectations. But for a guy who's number 1 overall pick at 18, lived up to the hype and then some, right? Like, how many would have loved their number 1 picks to be 2-time Cup champion, a captain, a face of a franchise for 16 years? There aren't very many players out there like the Crosbys and those guys that have kind of lived up to that kind of hype as number 1 picks. But they'll have a statue outside of Emily Arena at some point, and his number will be retired next to Marc-St. Louis and Emilien Cavalier at some point. It'll be weird to see him play out the rest of his career for the Predators.
Yeah, very weird. And it's obviously, like, you can't even probably put into proper words the impact it might have on the locker room, but people forget this is still a 40-goal scorer in the league. Yeah. Do you think, on paper, again, take away whatever changes in the locker room, on paper, Gensel and McDonough in, Sergachev, Stamkos out, Tampa Bay, better, same, worse on paper?
Well, I think they're better defensively at 5-on-5. I think they're overall, but like you lose one big-time scorer in Stamkos, you add Gensel, right? So you're still going to be top-heavy for the most part in that lineup, and you don't have the middle 6 help that you needed overall going in the summertime. And I know Sergachev has his warts, so he's not a perfect player, but he's still 27 years old and capable of being a number 1 caliber defenseman. So, that's – and I love McDonough too. I think they missed McDonough the last 2 or 3 years. And so he'll be definitely step in and fill those gaps, but I don't think they've really taken a step forward. Maybe they've taken some smaller steps defensively, which is important to them to be better 5-on-5 defensively. That was their whole thing. And I guess the hindsight to this other part of it too is Lightning have lost the first round the last 2 years, and they have superstars in Point, Kucherov, and Hedman, and they want to win the cup again. And so, do you keep on running it back at the same time, or do you make some changes, right? And so that's the counterpoint to this whole thing is there are some franchises that maybe are not say too loyal, but they just get too emotional with their decisions, and they could just run the whole team back, and then they could still be like the Pittsburgh Penguins, who haven't won a playoff series since 2000.
Ouch.
17, 18. Right. It's been a long time.
I think 18 was their last one that they won around, because they won in the first round, and then finally Washington beat them to kind of conquer their demons and go on to win the cup. I think that might have been the last one. And it pains me to say that. And the one thing that's interesting for me to kind of watch too, because obviously Gensel, like, proven playoff performer. I understand why they want to add him. It's going to be interesting to see how he fills in, and like seeing the difference between him and Stamkos, in the sense that Stamkos is like a pure sniper, right? Gensel is a goal scorer, but it's not the same. He's not sitting there at the top of the circles ripping at top corner. He's like more opportunistic, finding the soft spots on the ice. And I mean, that's someone that probably complements a Kucherov really well, but it's just, you think about their power play. How do they supplement the like pure shooter where I don't know that Gensel is necessarily that right fit?
Yeah, and the power play has been a huge part of their success the last decade, right? And, maybe you have, points been in the bumper all the time. Maybe he goes to the, other side, or, I mean, they don't know if they have another right shot there. That's kind of that. They don't have anybody that's obviously Stamkos, but they don't have that one timer on that one side, maybe unless Gensel plays that way. But I don't know. It's so if you're a Lightning fan, do you want to see him run it back and watch probably Crosby finish his career with the Penguins and then not win another playoff series? Or would you rather them
do?
What's that? Or like maybe fans would love to see Stamkos finish his career in Tampa and then them not win another, go beyond the second round the rest of the time, and then watch Kucherov and point and say that, okay, you had 2 cups, you had 3 cup finals in a row, you had a great run. I think a lot of fans would still love to have that, but when you're Julian Breezeball, you have to make decisions that are cutthroat, and they have.
Yeah.
And whether this works or not will kind of determine his legacy too, beyond the cups that he brought to Tampa Bay, which he was a big part of. But when you're the GM that lets Steven Stamkos walk, then that's going to be part of your epitaph too.
No, for sure. And I personally, like on the Crosby front, I sit in the camp of whatever makes the player happy. I'm all for. Like, you've been a staple for the organization for 2 decades. You've got 3 cups, in Stamkos's case, 2. If the player wants to stay, I want to find a way to help them stay and like be honored in that way. But I also have no problem with them leaving if they want to go on and pursue other accolades or try and win more cups, which is probably a little bit more speaking to Crosby than Stamkos, but so be it. It's going to be interesting, though, to see how it unfolds this year for both them and the Predators, teams that are going to be pretty heavily watched, I would think, league-wide. Join us in the Brainerd Lakes area this Labor Day weekend for the CRMC Championship presented by Gertens at Cragen's Legacy Courses. Last year's PGA Tour America's Tournament of the Year kicks off Thursday, August 30th, with free admission for everyone. VIP tickets are available and could go fast, so do not wait to claim access to 3 hospitality areas that have your food and beverage needs covered. Last year, Faber, Shaw, Addison, and Walker were out in full force supporting their teammate and one of your favorite Minnesota Wild players in Matt Boldy. Who knows which Wild players you might run into this year, not to mention 2-time Stanley Cup champion Sean Chambers getting in on the action. Don't miss the Saturday Night Jam on the 18th green featuring The Hype. This is your chance to watch the next PGA Tour superstar right here in Brainerd, Minnesota. For more information, visit crmcchampionship.com. The other one before we get into the mailbags here, just have to bring it up, of course. Ryan Suter, bought out by the Minnesota Wild, goes over to the in-division Dallas Stars, gets bought out there too. And the St. Louis Blues say, you know what? I think both of them are wrong. Let's bring him in. We're going to have 3 Central Division teams paying him at the same time. He's probably going to get booed in about 60-70% of his games this year. What do you think, though, about the St. Louis Blues bringing in Ryan Suter?
Well, they also have a lot of defensemen too. So it's not like they have a big need on the blue line as it is, unless they make some trades. But I think it's just, you think about too, Suter played for Nashville, right? And so he has most of the teams, then Utah, Winnipeg next. I mean, I don't blame a guy for wanting to stick in the league and play. And, I guess it's not quote unquote his fault the 3 teams are paying him,
by the way, I worship him for that. That is impressive as all hell. I don't knock him. It's surprising, though, for the teams a little bit.
It is. And I guess he said that the Blues were one of the first teams to contact him when the Stars signed him like 3 years ago. And so there was interest right away then. And then they just went with the Stars on a 4-year deal. I think he talks about being a different guy than maybe what he was labeled before, of not being able to work with young players. And there might be some evidence to that in Dallas working with the young defensemen. But if he's open to playing a 6th or 7th D role, like that's a lot different from what he's used to playing his entire life. And what it tells to me is the Blues have other things cooking in the blue line as far as moves being made, because, you know, you don't reach and bring a guy in like that if you don't have a need. He's not a guy you have on a 7th D and scratch 30 games in a season. I just don't see that working. Like, guys like Goligoski handled it like a pro, and like, good for him to do that. And guys who have that kind of makeup, I just never seen Ryan Suter as a guy who can rotate in and out and be happy with it. You know, not happy with it, but like be able to be a great member of that room. So, hey, you know, maybe Utah next year after this year, and then get the whole, if they're still in the division, keep it rolling.
That would be so impressive. Yeah, and a lot of people forget, like, he's approaching 1,500 games in the league. That's no joke. Yeah. This is still a guy that has the pedigree. He's been an incredible pro. Whatever Wild fans want to cling on to for the negatives on why he left, there is a reason he was originally signed. The guy...
13 years, yeah.
It's crazy, but easy to forget when you cling to the negatives and see recent playoff rounds where we've gone up against him. But, I mean... I guess kind of good luck to him, even though I don't want the Blues to do well. But, you know, hey, we'll see where it goes and how many more Central Division teams he can knock down. All right, mailbag. First one here, and we'll start with a couple of the, I mean, we've already kind of hit a lot of the parenting stuff, but third period hype man, as a fellow new dad to a 9-week-old, I just want to say congrats. It's the best. Hype man's one of a kind. I've met up with him a couple of times after Wild games, and just a beauty of a human.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what our baby is at 9 weeks as well, to see what the hype is all about. But yeah, no, it's they tell you it's a game changer and a life changer, and it absolutely is. And from the hospital day one, going forward, and just, you know, it's hard to think hard to think of the world without this kid now. It's hard to think of our life without him. Yeah. After this arriving. I'm sure the same thing for you. The podcasts have never been the same since then, with Logan chiming in and little hot takes there.
Yeah.
But one of the questions I think too was, like, what was your first Dusty eye moment? I think, and I can't remember who asked it, but for me it was after the delivery, and it was around midnight on Father's Day, and of course it goes to the mom first for the skin to skin and maybe an early try to feeding kind of thing, and then went to me. I was in a chair next to her, like in a hospital bed, and it kind of went my shirt off too, skin to skin, and he kind of just, like, obviously he was exhausted, having gone through a whole day of labor and a bunch of different things, but for him, like, just laying on my chest and sleeping, and like realizing, holy crap, you know, this baby is ours. And that really was my first kind of misty-eyed moment of, after all, like, the 9 months of wondering and thinking, and what this baby will be like, and then have that first kind of skin to skin and nap on you was kind of the more, probably just didn't hurt that it was on Father's Day too. So all those kind of emotions kind of ran around. I don't know about you, but
if I'm being honest, it's crazy because, like, people tell you and they warn you about what it's like when, you know, a child's born. I, like, had a panic moment when Logan was born because, like, the baby comes out and they're, like, blue, like they're a Smurf, because they haven't gotten any oxygen yet. And in reality, it was probably like 4 or 5 seconds that he just, like, was kind of sitting there limp in the doctor's hands. For me, it felt like 30 seconds to a minute, and I was, like, having a panic attack that, like, oh my God, something's wrong. And then he cried, and the second he cried, I was sent. That was it. It was just like, he's okay. He's here. This is all real. That's fine. Send him over to mom. Like, mom needs him first. She did all the work and whatever. But that, like, weirdly for me, the first moment was just, like, hearing him cry and knowing that he was okay. That was the big one for me.
Yeah, and like at that moment where he's delivered and they bring you to that kind of car wash situation where they do all the testing and they wipe them off with, like, all the towels and stuff like that, and kind of the measurements. And I know it's not a car wash, but it's funny. We have photos of that took of, like, him getting, like, rub down and all that stuff, and the measurements, and then the ASCAR tests and all that stuff. And once he came back to us, that was kind of like the real. I looked at my wife, and who was been through hell and back, and then she just wanted to hold him and just like, where's my baby, And then once we had that first couple nights in the hospital, that's when that first night when they cry and no one else is there for you, the nurses can get paged, but we're like, okay, this is on us. Let's figure this out.
Sink or swim. Yep.
Yeah.
Last one around parenthood, and then we are getting all into the hockey topics. Keith Landgrebe, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. When is Michael Russo babysitting?
It's a good question.
What you leaving alone with your kid?
He is in Portugal right now, so unavailable. But I will say that in the beginning stages when I first moved, he did watch Sammy, our dog, for a little bit at his place. So I'm not sure if he's comfortable with babies quite yet. We will leave that open to him. Maybe let him meet him first and feel it out. But yeah, no, he's been supportive and all that. And of course, when you have a teammate or fellow beat writer go on leave for such a long time, a lot of onus goes on him. So give him credit for being supportive and all that stuff for that. But yeah, I'm not sure when the Russo babysitter thing is happening. It might not be the number one option, but we'll have to see how that goes.
Thank God it was this summer instead of next summer when all the Kirill news is going to be spiraling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe he's a natural. We don't even know it yet. So I want to sell him short on that. So
sleeper.
Yeah, at least it's during a quote unquote boring off season that maybe arrive versus the next one.
Perfect. Well, all right. Kicking it into hockey mode. This interview is brought to you by our friends at Waggle Golf. Waggle Golf believes what you wear on the course should reflect your individuality, who you are, where you're from, your hobbies, interests, and passions. All the stuff that makes you, well, you. That's why every design is inspired by the desire to create a piece of apparel that strikes a chord when you see it, that makes you say, wow, that was made for me. Because in a lot of ways, it was. Ready to get your waggle on? Go to getyourwaggleon.com, throw in promo code SP10 at checkout to take 10% off your entire order. First one from Lizard to Kaprizov to Lizard to Kaprizov. If Dean gets the Columbus job and Freddie agrees to waive his no trade, if they are even on it, do you think they, being the Wild, would get anything more than future considerations without retaining salary, or do we have to add a sweetener?
Well, it's an interesting one. Like we know how much Dean loves Freddie, and Freddie plays some of his best hockey with Dean as a head coach. So it wouldn't surprise me to see there be interest there. I don't think he's a straight huge you have to give up a second round pick to get rid of Freddie. I don't think you're getting a ton in return, but he's still, when he plays well and when the previous year, which is why they signed him to maybe a longer than you thought deal, he's a very valuable, versatile player, and we could chip in 18, 20 goals, then, he's not making a big cap hit. It's just a long-term, the length of the deal, the term of it is kind of what bothers people, of course. So
yeah,
I don't know. You don't have to, trade him, give up a second round pick to get rid of him. I think you might get something in return. It won't be a big return by any stretch, but that's just because of his contract and stuff. So I'll be curious to see what happens. I know the Columbus with the new GM Waddell, they have to sign Sillinger still, and they still have the Line is going to be part of talks. I think once he gets out of the program, I know the Wild have been interested in Line. I don't know how that would fit unless they make another salary cap move, a la a Goudreau or somebody else like that, to make it work. But yeah, that's something. If Dean Evason is indeed in town this week, like is reported by our Aaron Portsline, along with Jay Woodcroft for the job, then that would certainly be on a high point for me of a place that if they wanted to move Freddie, where would be a good fit.
Yeah. And friend of the Soda Pod, Phil, along with Aaron and Nate on Beerly Hockey, he asked, What's going to happen game one of the NHL season between Columbus and Minnesota? Who wins? And obviously, if Dean's in the fold, that certainly adds a fun wrinkle to it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome to see like the Dean Evison tribute video with all the times he smacked Darby Hendrickson and them, and the arm after victories and stuff like that.
Gut punches.
That would be it'd be fun to watch all the offseason storylines between both franchises. Regardless of, the Wild if they have 2 home games and 7 on the road, so they better win that game, quite frankly, after what's going to be at their schedule coming up.
From Big PB55, after spending the last year or two as an active media member covering the Wild, what do you feel of the biggest, I'm guessing are the biggest mistakes management is making versus what you saw in Tampa Bay that is holding them back from being a true cup contender?
Well, I think in Tampa, what you think you've seen them do is be a little more cutthroat in kind of decisions they have to make. They're both bold at the deadline, trading top picks to get like Coleman and Goudreau and Savard and stuff, which of course they're in a different situation than the Wild are. The Wild haven't been giving up top picks, but they're not a player or two away from, winning a cup. But one of the differences is of course just their very strict business-like, maybe even to a point cutthroat approach with certain guys, trading McDonough, no trade clause versus it feels like, and this is just Garrett's philosophy, he likes his guys, his players, and he doesn't feel like he needs to get rid of them because he feels like you have to replace them anyways. So I think there is, I guess loyalty is the wrong word, but there's a little more of probably an emotional attachment, I think, with some players in these contracts you're seeing. It would be hard for me to envision, certain signings that were done here that would be done in Tampa. But, the Steven Stamkos thing is a perfect example, right? Like they let the most important player, best player in franchise history tangle in the wind. Like, did you see any example of the Wild doing that with any of their guys?
Well, it's funnier too when like Stamkos didn't even have a discussion the year prior, whereas all of these guys are getting signed a year prior to being free agents. So it is definitely different, but like you said, very different situations for the organizations too.
They're different places in their path, right? I think the Wild have done a better job drafting in more recent years than the Lightning haven't had first round picks. They traded them all away, right? But even like the second or third round, like the Wild have developed or have drafted better the last 6-7 years than the Tampa Bay Lightning have. So there's strengths to both, but I just think overall, just each GM is different in their own way and the way that they want to do things. But I think Tampa Bay has been a little more cutthroat in some of their decisions that they've made with their roster. And part of that has to deal with the cap situation that they've dealt with, and part of it deals with the window that they're in, that they have, they're not building towards the future. They're building towards the now, and how can I win make cups as I can with this core that I have. So but I think that would be the main one for me, the differences in how they operate.
Fair.
And plus, and the analytics department is much bigger in Tampa too. The analytics department, they have more people working in that versus they had Matt Sells, obviously, with the Wild and maybe some help there. But I think they do a lot more as far as having the personnel and manpower analytics department than they do in Minnesota.
Yeah. All right, Johnson from Wisconsin. Any NHL comps for Zeev Buium?
That's a good question. I think there's a few of them out there. I asked our prospect writer, Scott Wheeler, for them too. And he had, let's make this up right, somewhere between Josh Morrissey, John Carlson, and Chris Letang are the 3 players, like somewhere in between. I know they're all different players, but there's certainly a high upside here with Zeev. And, those are pretty good players that you're comparing them against. I think I had Morrissey in my Norris Trophy ballot this year. So clearly, doesn't have like the mega size that some of the guys do on the blue line, but he has everything else, like the smarts, the skating ability. You saw him in the Frozen Four, how he control a game. So just really impressive that they could get him at 12. I think the other question too is him will he come this year, next year? I think he'll be in at least another year at DU, but he's getting close. So it wouldn't be out of the stretch of imagination he plays it this year at DU. If they don't go on a run, then he's in the Brock Faber situation end of the year at that point. So, but we'll see.
Okay. We've got two more hot take-ish type questions here. So we're throwing this over to our great friends at Barrel Theory Beer Co. Keyboard Warriors, hot take segment. Everyone make sure you go and check out Barrel Theory here all summer long with new beer offerings coming out, events up the wazoo. You can check out Facebook and Instagram to see what they have on a weekly basis. And of course, make sure that you're ready come wild season to check out all their offerings at the X. First one here, Joe. Could the Wild ever send Height to Europe for a year? If he doesn't make the NHL lineup, I don't see how going back to the WHL would help his development after he's already dominated for 2 years.
Well, it's an interesting question. Clearly, like you said, he had a tremendous year in WHL, already the leading scorer in history for his junior team. And the Wild are to give him every chance in camp to show he can make the team. It's one of those weird situations where maybe he might be best suited in the AHL, but can't go there because of age restrictions. But I think he's a guy who can come in, get that 9-game tryout at least, and see what they can do with him there. And I'm not saying, like, to say it's a waste of time, a little oversimplification on it. Like, I don't think Riley Height's like a complete perfect or completely polished player. Like, if he comes in and shows there's still some issues in his game that he needs to fix to be ready at the pro level, you know, they could send him back to junior. I don't think I see him playing in Europe. That would be a little surprising to me. It's not it's an option, of course, but I think that what he does this summer, I think he already spent some time in Minnesota, and like Liam Ogren did spend time in Minnesota. So I think what we see in training camp this year, preseason, and I'll get probably the early season stint in NHL to get a feel for if he's NHL ready or not. Because they don't want to dump him on the fourth line and play him 8 minutes. Like, you want to play him more. He's 19 years old. But it is a lot to ask a 19-year-old kid to play in the NHL from day one. So I think that'll be interesting, fascinating case to watch in camp and preseason to see. The player will dictate where he goes based on how he plays and how he fits in.
Very fair. Next one, again, kind of fitting in the hot take piece. From License to Kirill, seeing all the armchair GMs and emotional responses to all the topics, if you could correct the perception of the fans on any response, positive or negative, what would it be? So really, like, are people overreacting in a good or bad way to anything? And what would you say in order to correct that? And
so as far as issues that maybe are misconceptions or whichever, I think that people go on two completely sides of the coin with Kirill Kaprizov, for example, of that they think that there's some people that are like completely worried that he's gone. And I don't think that's like set in stone that he won't come back or won't resign here in Minnesota. So that's one where I think that you can talk some fans off the ledge a little bit, because there are some fans that are, you know, you reached out to me or said like, hey, this guy's out of here. I think there's a legit concern about it. I think that's something the next year that Bill Guerin and company have said that they need to show that they can become a contender and they can build around him. But I think there's some people who are probably after 20 years of not seeing the success of the franchise long term are worried about that. But I think that's something that's one of the things that I would try to like course correct or make sure fans don't completely realize that's going to happen or not. Those will be important this year to look at, see how they do, and see how they can make a case for him to stick around.
All right, next up from Only Puns CEO. What is one glaring weakness the Wild had last season that you feel is likely to improve significantly this season? This could be the performance of a given player or players, or an overall stat, category, metric. Take your pick.
Well, there's two things, but one of them is goaltending. I think goaltending was one of the Achilles heels last year, and from the year before when both Gustafsson and Fleury were good. So I think in that particular case, if Gustafsson is back, having a bounce back year, the rotation of him with Wallstedt getting some starts in Fleury, I think that would be a huge turnaround for them. To have that stability goaltending is one of the reasons why the penalty kill was so rough last year. So I think between that and the secondary scoring, which is a big issue, and that depends a lot on the Ryan Hartmans, the Goudreaus, the Johanssons of the world stepping in and having, just much better bounce back years. So healthy Foligno, Liam Ogren stepping in, being a regular player. So I think overall, those are the two key areas. I think one of them, both of them will have to flip if they want to be a playoff team in this division. But I think goaltending is such a erratic position at times that if that's one that could be correctable, just with performances that you've seen previously from Gustafsson just a couple of years ago, if that's all of a sudden a strength or above average at your position, then it's a whole different scenario for the Wild last year, and it'll be different this year. So I think if there's two, that's the areas where I think there's a chance to have that bigger bump are those two. The penalty kill is one, but I don't know if that's going to go from 31 to 10 overnight. So I think that's something that's takes some time. But I think goaltending, clearly they showed 2 years ago, this was, Gustafsson was the top 3 goals against. So there is a possibility of that happening. So a little more realistic, I think, than maybe the PK turning around dramatically.
Okay. And going right off of that from John Mashute, any indication that Flower will work for the Wild organization after he retires?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on what role it might be. Like, I think that he has said he's probably going to retire in like Vegas or Montreal, right? Or wants his family to kind of, or live there eventually after he's done. So I can see a scenario where the Wild approach him about being like a roving goalie consultant. I don't see him being like a goalie coach and like going on the road like 40 times a year and having that kind of schedule. I know how much he wants to spend time with his girls and his family. So if he can be in a situation where he doesn't have to live kind of full time in Minnesota, and there's a role that's he could be kind of a rotating one that can go to Iowa, he can kind of look at some top prospects, maybe do a scouting trip or two. I think there is a possibility that could happen. But it just kind of depends on how he feels after this year, his last year in the playing career, of what that role might look like. I just don't see him necessarily being a goalie coach. He would be a great one. I just don't know if he wants to kind of go through that grind again of going through and not playing. It'd be one thing to go through the grind and travel, but to not play. Yeah. So that would be I haven't talked to him about this recently, about what's next, but I think the Wild would have interest in maintaining that relationship with him, because there's no better person to teach young goaltenders, whether it's Wallstedt or whatever, about being a pro than him.
Can he just be like chief locker room officer? Like, just keep him around for the vibes, if nothing else. I don't know. I'm sure they'll throw anything at him, like find a way to work with him if he's so inclined. But like you said, he's probably not going to be one to travel.
Well, I think he loves being around the guys. He loves being part of the team. I just know that if you play 20 years in the league, guys usually take a little bit of time to figure out what they want to do, right? And then kind of, even Guerin took some time to be work as executive, or kind of dip his feet in before you start just jumping right into the coaching. I think he would probably be one of those guys, a big family man the way he is, that he'd want to take a little step back and spend as much time as he can with his kids. And if he could get a role where he can be not there full time on the team, then I can see a scenario where he'd be very valuable in some sort of role here.
Awesome. Mike Wheeler, what are they doing about the TV situation? Wouldn't we all like to know?
I think that's every market, most markets, if you're not New York or whatever, are going through this. I think
or Dallas.
Dallas is a very interesting approach, which I think teams like the Wild could look into, right? Because it's important to find ways, especially with the fan base the way that Minnesota has, to connect with them and to continue that strength. If they want to build the ticket holding base like that's been the last couple of years, to when they can be a contender, having that ability to connect over the TV or streaming is so important. So they have been going over different kind of options for TV. I don't know if there's one specific one set in stone quite yet, but I think that every single organization, not just in hockey, but other sports, the Twins are going through, other teams are going through it. They need to find a plan B and there's so many different ways now you can do it versus back in the day, right? There's so many different streaming options and ways you can go direct to consumer, and you can make a little money doing it too. Because make no mistake, like the RSNs, as a pain in the ass that they've been the last few years, are a huge revenue stream for these teams, right? So you have to find a way, if you're the NHL team, to make money still by doing it versus getting the $15-20 million a year from the RSNs for those rights. So it's one thing to connect the consumer in one way. Another thing is, if you're doing that from a team perspective, you have to pay for all that stuff and be the infrastructure for it and handle that versus having a Bally's or whatever. So and I'm sure, like just like the other teams, the Wild are going through that process, and I think most people hope that they can continue with the relationship with Bally's and such, but you have to be prepared for the other side of it too.
And I mean, speaking for myself and some of the fans I know, does not need to be something that's a free offering by any means. If there was just one place where you could watch all the Wild games, people will gladly pay a subscription for it, and you can sell ad revenue off of that too. Like, if you know people are showing up there and it's not like cable or bouncing around, hey, where do I watch this week? Is it NHL Network? Is it TNT? Is it, on ESPN Plus? Is it on Bally? Like, you're going to have a very set audience, and you can probably do pretty well with ad revenue. Now, does it make up the 15 to 20 million like you talked about, especially after covering the infrastructure? Who knows? But there's definitely something there that can be done. It's just, can they get it quite to the point where it makes financial sense? Yeah.
And you have more control over that stuff too, right? You have more control of the ads that you have and that kind of thing if you have it from your direct to consumer product. But you're right. I think people would pay for subscriptions for that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Carter Wetmore, are both Western Conference wild card teams coming from the Central this season?
It certainly feels that way. And if you're a Wild fan, you probably hope it's that way, just because of, Dallas isn't going anywhere. The Avalanche, while they've taken a little step back, aren't going anywhere. Winnipeg was formidable last year. Nashville just got a lot better. Utah, the old Coyotes, got a lot better. The Blues are probably hovering around that little mushy middle as well. So I think it's going to be a dogfight to the end for one of those last wild card spots between the Wild and those other teams. So
yeah, but I mean, how about this, Joe? Pick one of these teams to not make the playoffs then. Vegas Golden Knights, Vancouver Canucks, Edmonton Oilers, Los Angeles Kings.
Oilers are in. I have to imagine Vegas is in.
Kings are the only one that's in flux for me.
Yeah, the Kings, like, depending on what happens with their goaltending and such. Yeah. It's
tough.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, and there are a lot of teams that have a lot of hype in the summertime that don't turn out, right? Like,
totally.
Who says Nashville is a cup contender all of a sudden? Who knows what happens? But, and I don't necessarily think that the Utah is ready to necessarily make the playoffs right yet. But they were in that contention last year up until the fact that they announced their franchise basically dying, and all of a sudden they lost a bunch of games in a row, So
that's a team I'm weirdly high on, and I'll probably be very wrong, but I think they're going to be fighting for a wild card. Yeah.
And then every divisional game will be so much more important next year, right? All those 2-point and 1-point games. So, I would say there is a decent chance in my mind that they'll be all from the Central, unless there's a team like that takes a really big step back, like Winnipeg or whatever. The injuries decimate the team.
Sure.
Where you have one of those years like the Lightning had in 2017 when they missed the playoffs or whatever.
Yeah, very fair. Okay, last one then to wrap it up here. Final question brought to you as always by our good friends at Waggle Golf. First, make sure you head over to getyourwaggleon.com. Throw in promo code SP10 to take 10% off your entire order. And we've got the Waggle Golf Dream Foursome. And for this week, we're going to go a little bit obscure. Joe, specifically, who are 3 guys you want to grab? And I mean, whether this is out on the golf course in your carts or just sitting at the bar, grabbing a couple beers, who are 3 dads that you would want to sit down with and just kind of pick their brains and kind of hear their experience and stories from raising kids?
Oh man, it's a good one. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't have my dad as part of that one. We golfed together growing up. He taught me how to play, and so I think him being part of it. I know this is not a real person necessarily, but Jack from This Is Us, Jack Pearson, makes every dad look bad as you watch those shows. I think having a character like that to listen to, it's one thing to like want a celebrity there or whatever like that. I mean, I don't know what their experience is like being a dad, but I think between my dad and my grandpa who passed away, like I think those 2 would be great to have them kind of riffing off each other and doing that. And a little Jack Pearson there just because I've watched the show a couple of times and seems like he does everything right. So of course it's on TV, so everything's done right on TV, right? So, but yeah. I think that would be up there. How about you?
So, I mean, obviously it'd be nice to go the route, like you said, like have my dad and his dad who's passed away, like for them specifically. I actually, like from a stance of like getting different perspective, I actually have my other grandfather on my mom's side who like I really didn't have the best relationship with. Like he was just a very intimidating guy, like beyond intellectual. Like this is a guy who designed the computers that were the size of a wall back before computers were a thing. And he was just a very intimidating guy, but like beyond his years in wisdom. And to bring him back and like now that I'm an adult and be able to have more of a real conversation with him would be really interesting to me, because I do think that we'd like connect way more than like when I was a kid and I was like almost a little afraid of him. So like that'd be really cool for me and it'd be good to learn. One that I think would be really interesting is Tiger Woods' father. I mean, given everything that went into that, like the good and the bad, right? Like, I don't want to just get like, oh, what's the best advice? Like, I kind of want to hear some of the, maybe what shouldn't I do? So I think that would be really interesting to kind of see all sides of, that whole upbringing. And then, I mean, I had a funny one, kind of with you in the fictional world, but I'm a big South Park guy, and I think Randy Marsh is one of the greatest characters in television, and he is far from a good father, but he would just be there for the comedic relief. The other 2 would be a lot more for wisdom. Randy Marsh is there purely for the comedy, and there would be a plethora of it.
Oh yeah, there's tons of TV characters that you'd love to have on there. So you want comedic value for like Al Bundy to get on there for you and about his parenting.
Oh man, Red Foreman would be a good one for me. That 70s show. That was one of my early sitcom watches.
Your dad from Wonder Years, So
some good ones.
I think there's you mentioned Tiger Woods, like the Serena Williams dad, the movie they made about that. Too.
Oh man, yeah.
But I think you're right. Like we had Ray Ferraro on our podcast a month or so ago, and he was really good about advice from a hockey parent, like a hockey dad perspective, that I think were lessons that I would take, even no matter what my son goes into or what kind of sport or activity. But yeah, I'm as I told you before, I'm in like a dad's group classes on Tuesday nights. I'm all for, as a journalist, I'm all for learning and getting new perspectives and asking friends about it. So I'm not going to pretend to be the expert dad off the hop. So yeah, anybody I can get advice from, I'm open to.
Yeah, very, very open to endless advice. Oh man. Oh, perfect. Well, Joe, solid episode here. Got through a lot of questions. Very wild heavy, which is to be expected, of course. We'll be coming back next week, everybody. We do have a great interview banked and ready for you. We'll be teasing that coming up soon. But appreciate all of you tuning in. We continue to get more and more listeners every week. So thank you all. If this is your first time checking out the show, please subscribe, whether you came through the Soda Pod or came through the Fellowship of the Rink feed. Check out the Soda Pod on YouTube as well. That's where we'll drop all of our individual clips from all of our interviews, from all of the recordings we do here. And again, that 5-star review, telling your friends, anything you can do to spread the good word about us, about our great friends, all, of course, Cragans, again, up in Brainerd's, Waggle Golf, which you guys have heard us spout out about endlessly. We're sitting here wearing the fresh gear as we speak. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Barrel Theory Beer Co. with some of the best beer in Minnesota, definitely the best in St. Paul. But, Joe, anything you want to end on here?
No, I just hope you and your family feel better. I see, like, one of these episodes, we'll have both of our sons in our lab doing it. I have no doubt in the summer that'll have to be the case. It'll be make for a good logo if we ever do that.
I'll be smart.
The Simba cam during the show. But yeah, no, thanks everybody for listening and for watching on YouTube, and all our partners, of course. And we'll have a couple of interviews lined up for you guys in the next few weeks. And always send us some requests for interviews too. The guys you want to hear from, whether it's Gophers or Wild, former players, whatever. Just send us, a note on the YouTube or on Twitter. Let's send some requests, some people you want to hear us talk to, and we'll go from there. But thanks so much for joining in.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in for yet another installment of Fellowship of the Rink. You stay classy, stay to hockey.